child was left on the porch, paralyzed, abandoned, clinging to life with only a piece of paper and a prayer. Then a stray, scarred dog rushed towards the child. Its next action brought tears to everyone's eyes. Tom sat at the kitchen table, fingers tapping idly on his laptop, the soft hum of code compiling in the background. The new house on Maple Street was quiet. Too quiet, maybe, but that's how he liked it. Grace, still in her scrubs, burst through the door, her voice bright despite the 12-hour shift she'd just finished. "Honey, you won't believe the chaos today. 2 deliveries back to back." She dropped her bag and kissed his cheek, her energy a stark contrast to his stillness. Married 3 months, they were still settling into this life, dreaming of a little family someday, maybe a dog bounding through the backyard. The next morning started like any other. Birds chirped outside, sunlight spilling through the curtains. Tom stretched, savoring the calm, when a faint sound broke it. A baby's cry, sharp and insistent. He frowned, glancing at Grace, who was already sitting up in bed, her brow furrowed. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. The cry came again, louder, from the front porch. They stumbled out of bed, half-dressed, and Tom yanked the door open. There, in a wicker basket, was a baby, tiny, red-faced, wailing. A folded letter sat tucked beside him. Grace knelt instantly, scooping the child into her arms, her nurse's instincts kicking in. "Shh, it's okay, little guy," she murmured, rocking him as his cries softened. Tom stood frozen, staring at the scene, his mind racing. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, picking up the letter with trembling hands. He read aloud, voice shaky. To Grace, the kind nurse from the hospital. "I can't raise him. His name's Oliver, 3 months old. He's paralyzed from the waist down. I saw you with patience, how gentle you were. Please, take care of him. I'm sorry." The words hung heavy in the air. Grace looked up, eyes wide, clutching Oliver tighter. "Paralyzed?" she whispered, then gently lifted his blanket, checking his legs. They lay still, limp against her touch. She swallowed hard. "Tom, he needs help, now." Tom's stomach churned. "Who just leaves a kid like this? And why us?" His voice cracked, a mix of shock and fear. Grace didn't answer right away, her focus on Oliver. She ran a hand over his tiny head, then said softly, "I think I know her, a girl from the maternity ward, maybe? She cried the whole time, wouldn't look at anyone. I held her hand once." Tom blinked, trying to process it. "You're saying she picked you? Out of everyone?" Grace nodded, her face set with determination. "She must have seen me at work, trusted me." She shifted Oliver, checking his breathing, his pulse, steady, but he was pale, fragile. "He's dehydrated. We need to get him to a doctor." Tom ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "Grace, this is insane. We can't just... What are we supposed to do with him?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "We figure it out. He's here now." The room spun for Tom. Yesterday life was simple. Coding, coffee, Grace's laughter. Now a baby. Their baby. Lay in his wife's arms, a stranger's plea tying them to him. Oliver whimpered, and Grace hummed softly, her calm cutting through the chaos. Tom sank onto the porch step, the letter crumpled in his fist, staring at the little boy who just shattered their quiet world. The kitchen was a mess of baby bottles and half-finished coffee mugs, the clock ticking past midnight. Tom slumped in a chair, staring at Grace as she cradled Oliver, his tiny chest rising and falling. "We can't send him to foster care," Grace said, her voice firm despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "He's already been abandoned once." Tom rubbed his temples, the weight of it all pressing down. "Grace, we're not ready for this. I code software. I don't know the first thing about a kid, let alone one who can't move his legs." She looked at him, unwavering. "We'll learn." Together, by morning they'd made the call. A lawyer friend agreed to help with the legal mess, even without a birth certificate. Oliver's first doctor visit confirmed it. Paralysis from the waist down, likely permanent, but he could thrive with care. Grace took a leave from the hospital, diving into research. Gentle stretches, special diapers, a routine to keep him comfortable. Tom shifted his work to remote, his laptop now a fixture on the dining table, though the constant ping of emails grated on his frayed nerves. Nights were the hardest. Oliver's cries pierced the silence, relentless, and Tom would stumble to the nursery, bleary-eyed, while Grace soothed him back to sleep. "He's tougher than he looks," she'd whisper, and Tom would nod, too tired to argue. Weeks blurred into a rhythm, fragile but steady. Then came the morning. Grace stepped into the backyard, coffee in hand, and froze. A German shepherd stood there, skinny, matted fur, shivering in the November chill. Its amber eyes locked on her, sharp and wary, but when she crouched and held out a hand, it inched closer, nuzzling her palm. "Hey, buddy," she murmured, stroking its head. Tom appeared at the door, frowning. "Grace, no, we've got enough on our plate." She ignored him, already decided. "His name's Charlie. He's staying." Charlie was a wild card. He stuck to Grace like glue, curling up beside her as she fed Oliver, but with Tom it was all low growls and stiff ears. "Great, a guard dog who hates me," Tom muttered, tossing a treat that Charlie sniffed and ignored. Grace laughed, the first real laugh in days. "Give him time. He's been through something, just like Oliver." A vet visit later, the truth came out. No collar, no chip, a shallow cut on his leg, the only mark of a rough past. Healthy, though, and fiercely loyal to his new territory. When Grace's sister stopped by, Charlie barked like the house was under siege, pacing until she left. "He's a protector," Grace said, beaming. Tom just sighed. Adjusting wasn't easy. Oliver's wails kept them up, and Charlie's pacing added to the chaos. Tom's patience frayed one night when he tripped over a chew toy, snapping, "This dog's gonna drive me nuts!" Grace shot back, "He's family now, deal with it." But then came the small wins. Tom started walking Charlie at dawn, the crisp air clearing his head. The dog trotted beside him, alert, and once when Tom tossed a stick, Charlie fetched it, tail wagging. "Not so bad, huh?" Tom said, half to himself. Grace caught them at it one morning and grinned. "Told you he's smart." She shared a story over dinner. Some hospital tale about a German shepherd that once dragged a patient from a wrecked car. "Maybe Charlie's our miracle too," she said, glancing at Oliver, who gurgled in his high chair. Tom watched them, his wife, this kid, that damn dog, and felt something shift. One night, Charlie's playful growl echoed through the house, and Oliver let out a squeaky laugh, his first real smile. Grace's eyes lit up, and Tom couldn't help but grin. The exhaustion didn't lift, but the house felt fuller, warmer, like they were building something real. The house was dark, the only sound the faint hum of the heater kicking on. Tom sprawled across the couch, laptop still open from a late-night coding session, his snores soft and uneven. Grace had slipped out to the 24-hour pharmacy. Oliver's latest cold had her worried, and the nursery was quiet. Charlie stretched out beside the crib like a sentinel. Then came the noise, a faint thud, muffled but wrong. Oliver's sleepy whimper followed, sharp and panicked, cutting through the stillness. Inside the nursery, the scene was a nightmare. Oliver had wriggled too far, his small body slipping between the crib slats, legs dangling uselessly as his head hovered inches from the hardwood floor. His arms flailed, tiny fingers grasping at air, but he couldn't pull himself up. Charlie was already on his feet, ears pricked, a low whine rumbling in his throat. The dog lunged forward, shoving his broad snout under Oliver's chest, pushing with steady force. His sturdy frame braced the boy, holding him aloft, refusing to let him fall. Charlie's whines grew louder, urgent, a call cutting through Tom's haze. He jolted awake, heart pounding, stumbling toward the sound. What the... The sight stopped him cold. Oliver, suspended by Charlie's strength, eyes wide with fear, the dog unwavering, his muscles taut as he kept the boy from disaster. "Oh, God!" Tom gasped, rushing to lift Oliver free, cradling him against his chest. Charlie stepped back, panting, but stayed close, eyes fixed on the baby. Tom's hands shook as he checked Oliver. Safe, breathing, alive. Tears stung his eyes. "You saved him, you crazy mutt," he choked out, sinking to the floor. Charlie nudged his arm, tail thumping once, as if to say, "I've got you." Grace burst through the door minutes later, plastic bag rustling with medicine. "Tom, She froze, taking in the crib's skewed blanket, Tom's red-rimmed eyes, Charlie's alert stance. "What happened?" she demanded, dropping to her knees beside them. Tom recounted it, voice breaking, and her hand flew to her mouth. Charlie did that. She reached for the dog, burying her face in his fur. You're our hero, Oliver fussed in Tom's arms, and she took him, kissing his forehead. But then she frowned, pressing a hand to his cheek. He's burning up. The hospital was a blur. Beeping monitors, sterile lights, a flurry of tests. Oliver's fever spiked, his little body trembling despite the blankets. Grace hovered, rattling off symptoms to the doctor like the nurse she was, while Tom paced, Charlie's image replaying in his mind. Hours later, the pediatrician called them in, her face serious but lit with something else. Hope. It's not just a cold, she said. We found something rare, a nerve condition. Temporary compression, not permanent paralysis. With treatment, he might move his legs again. Grace gripped Tom's hand, her breath catching. You mean he could walk? The doctor nodded. It's not certain, and it'll take time, therapy, monitoring for infections. But there's a chance. Tom stared, stunned. A chance? He echoed, the words sinking in. Grace laughed, a shaky, joyful sound, and pulled Oliver close. You hear that, buddy? You're a fighter. Later, in the dim hospital room, Tom watched Charlie's shadow in his memory. That gentle look the dog had given Oliver, like he'd known all along. Grace leaned against him, whispering, I told the nurses about Charlie. One said German shepherds have a sixth sense for saving people. Tom nodded, his throat tight. That night he dreamed of Oliver tumbling from the crib, but this time Charlie wasn't there. A cold sweat woke him, and he reached for Grace, grateful for the dog who'd rewritten their story. Spring arrived on Maple Street, the garden blooming with daffodils Grace had planted in a rare, free moment. Inside, Oliver's giggles filled the air, a sound that still caught Tom off guard. Months had passed since the hospital, and the change was slow but real. First, a twitch in his toes during therapy, then a shaky kick that sent Grace whooping through the house. Now he could sit up, chubby hands grasping at toys, his legs trembling with effort. Look at you, champ, Tom said, scooping him up as Grace clapped from the couch. Therapy sessions turned into playtime, Oliver beaming as he stretched toward milestones once thought impossible. Charlie was never far. The German shepherd padded after Oliver, a shadow with wagging tail, ready to nudge him upright when he tipped. Their bond had deepened. Oliver's first word wasn't mama or dada, but a garbled cha, reaching for the dog. Grace laughed every time, snapping photos. They're a team, she said, watching Charlie flop beside Oliver on a blanket, letting the boy tug his ears. The dog's wariness had faded too. No more barking at visitors, just a calm watchfulness, as if he knew the worst was behind them. Life settled into a new groove. Grace eased back into hospital shifts, her scrubs a familiar sight again, while Tom juggled deadlines from home, stealing glances at Oliver and Charlie through the window. Afternoons became sacred, Tom pushing Oliver's stroller, Grace tossing a ball for Charlie, the four of them sprawled in the grass after. This is it, isn't it? Tom said one day, the sun warm on his face. Grace leaned against him, nodding, our little chaos crew. The exhaustion lingered, but it was softer now, wrapped in contentment. One evening, Tom hauled a big rubber ball from the garage, rolling it across the yard. Oliver squealed, crawling after it, Charlie bounding alongside, nipping playfully. Grace joined in, her laughter ringing out as the ball bounced between them. Later, she pulled out a notebook, scribbling notes. I'm writing it all down, she told Tom, eyes bright. For Oliver, someday, how we got here. He kissed her forehead, marveling at her. A neighbor stopped by once, watching the scene, and mentioned offhand, saw a dog like that near the hospital last year, wandering. Funny how he found you. Tom smirked. Not funny, meant to be. The house felt alive, crayon marks on the walls, Charlie's fur on the rug. Oliver's toys scattered. Tom caught himself smiling at the mess, a far cry from the quiet he'd once craved. Grace stretched beside him on the porch one night, the stars peeking through. We're doing okay, aren't we? She asked. He squeezed her hand. Better than okay. In the stillness, Charlie's snores drifted from the living room, Oliver's soft breathing echoing down the hall, a family forged in the unexpected, now steady as the spring around them. The doorbell chimed on a crisp Saturday, cutting through the clatter of Oliver banging a spoon on his high chair. Oatmeal splattered across the tray. Tom wiped his hands on a dish towel, the faint scent of coffee lingering, and opened the door, expecting a package. Instead, a woman stood there, neatly dressed in a navy coat, hair pulled back, a nervous smile flickering. Beside her was a man in a faded flannel jacket, shifting his weight, his boots scuffed from wear. "Hi," she said, voice trembling. "I'm Carla, Oliver's mum." Tom's jaw tightened, a flood of questions stalling in his throat. Grace appeared behind him, Oliver on her hip, his sticky fingers clutching her shirt. She froze. "Carla?" she breathed. Carla nodded, clutching a worn envelope. "I'm not here to take him, I just needed to see he's okay." She handed Grace the envelope, legal papers, a handwritten note, and a thick stack of cash, edges frayed from handling. "I'm getting married," she said, glancing at the man, who offered a shy wave and a quiet hey. "Things are better now. That's for Oliver to help. Maybe a savings account or therapy costs. I'm so sorry for leaving him like I did." Her eyes welled up as she looked at the boy, now squirming and grinning in Grace's arms, his cheeks rosy from breakfast. "He's beautiful." Before Grace could respond, Carla turned away, the man guiding her back to their car, its engine rumbling faintly as they drove off. The door clicked shut, leaving silence. Grace sank onto the couch, Oliver babbling as she opened the note, her fingers tracing the shaky handwriting. "She says it's our choice now," she read aloud, voice thick. "Wants him to have a good life." Tom sat beside her, staring at the cash. Guilt money, maybe, but enough to ease some worries. Perhaps fund a swing set for the yard. "Should we tell her he's walking?" Grace asked, brushing Oliver's curls, still damp from his morning bath. Tom shook his head, his voice steady. "She made her peace, let's keep ours." They tucked the letter into a keepsake box, a piece of Oliver's story for later, when he'd ask about his roots. That night, Grace pulled Tom close in their bedroom, the quilt bunched around them, her whisper barely audible over Charlie's snores from the hall. "I've got news." He turned, catching the glint in her eyes under the dim lamplight. "I'm 8 weeks pregnant." The words hit like sunlight, warm and sudden. Tom laughed, pulling her into a tight hug, Oliver stirring in his crib nearby with a sleepy coo. "Another one," he teased, but his grin said everything. Pride, wonder, a touch of nerves. Grace nodded, resting her head on his chest. "Our family's growing." Weeks later, they hosted a picnic in the yard. Oliver, now toddling with a wobbly gait, chased Charlie around, the dog barking in delight, his fur glinting in the late afternoon sun. Friends milled about, sipping lemonade, marveling at the pair's antics. Tom nailed a small wooden sign to the porch, home of Oliver and Charlie, carved with pride during a quiet evening, wood shaving still dusting his jeans. Grace, glowing despite morning sickness, watched from a lawn chair, her hand on her belly, a plate of sliced watermelon beside her. "Think Charlie's ready for another kid?" she asked, smirking. Tom tossed a stick for the dog, grinning. "He's handled worse." As dusk settled, fireflies blinking in the twilight, Charlie flopped beside a new crib Tom had assembled in the nursery, its white paint still fresh, his eyes tracking the empty space where a second child would soon sleep. Grace leaned against the doorway, her journal open to a fresh page, the spine creased from use. "From one miracle to two," she murmured, pen moving as she sketched a quick doodle of Charlie's ears. Tom joined her, looking out at Oliver giggling in the grass, Charlie ever watchful, the breeze carrying the scent of blooming lilacs. The future stretched ahead, messy, loud, perfect. A family built from chance, held together by love, ready for whatever came next.